Hello and welcome to another episode of Making Stories Knit With. I'm Hannah-Lisa, your host for today and always. And I'm joined by a wonderful dear friend and lovely guest today. Hello to Canada. I'm joined by Ash Alberg, who you might know under their brand name Sunflower Knit. Uh, and I promised Ash that I would try and not take away all of the introduction as I usually do. So I'm going to leave it at that and leave it up to Ash to introduce themselves. Over to you.
You're like, we're just going to cut it short entirely. I love it. Hello, my name is Ash. I live on Treaty 1 territory in the middle of Canada. I am a hedge witch, a natural dyer, a knitwear designer, queer femme, and parent to the Coven Pooch Willow, who is currently snoozing and hopefully will continue to snooze through this whole thing. She has, throughout quarantine, become the unofficial Zoom mascot of all the Zoom because she puts her 85-pound body in my lap during every single Zoom meeting at some point. So we'll see.
I love it. We've had, I just told Ashley for we've had Tilly, Claire's dog, make an appearance multiple times already, so it wouldn't be the first time. And I always welcome cameo appearances here. Alrighty. Wonderful. I'm just going to take a quick look at the YouTube live stream studio. So everything seems to be working, which is great, other than the live chat, as usual. If this is not your first time with Making Stories Knit With, at some point we'll manage the live chat. Until then, I have wonderful Claire watching and relaying any questions to me.
Great. I love technology.
Yeah, well. I don't know what it is about YouTube and me. It's not like I love it. I really, really enjoy making stories knit with, and inevitably something goes wrong with the tech. Anyway,
I mean, I feel like the fact that this is even happening is pretty cool. So, that works.
True. No. We're not here to talk about tech, though. We're here to talk about your fabulous design and your wonderful essay for issue 4. Yes. We're nearing the end of our launch month, which feels insane. Time flies and it's so slow at the same time this year. Isn't it strange?
Yeah.
You designed an absolutely stunning shawl for issue 4 called Acorn.
Mm-hmm.
The sample is currently traveling. It's at one of our stockists in Germany.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, she was super thrilled. She got them yesterday. So, but I hope it shows up quite well. It's an absolutely beautiful, beautiful triangular shawl.
Yeah, the photos turned out so nicely for it too.
I loved them. I think it was the first sample that we photographed. And I always try to take something that I know the model will feel comfortable with. And Lena was like, ooh, I need this shawl. Yeah.
Well, and seeing all of the colors from all the test knitters as those were being shared was amazing. Like there was one, I mean, I love my neutrals, but there was one very bright red one that I was like, that looks like my lipstick color. And that is stunning. Like it worked so well.
It was the one, I think there was a photo where the test knitter had their hand like somewhere here and wore like a stunning ring with it.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Yeah.
I wanted the rings. I wanted the yarn. I wanted all of it.
Yeah. I do think it looks pretty spectacular in the original yarn.
Agreed. Yarn on the House's daughter base, which is what we used, is one of my favorite bases. It is perfectly woolly, usually smells very sheepy, which always makes me really happy. And it's just like a really gorgeous rustic yarn that is honestly one of my favorites for making lace because chunky lace is probably my favorite thing. But that's because I live in a very cold climate.
It's so good though. It's so
Mhm.
good. I love knitting lace. I really, really enjoy it. I know
Mhm.
not everyone does.
Yep.
But I don't wear, like the I think sometimes or often if you think about lace, it's this sort of it's the stuff that my grandma would have on her coffee table, like little lace doilies and
Yep.
stuff, like super intricate. And I'm not a very intricate person. Like that look would not agree with me.
Totally.
Which is why I love what you're doing. Like not only with Acorn, but with a lot of your designs where you pair beautiful lace with rustic woolly yarns, and it just gives it such a modern and such a wearable look.
Yeah. I
And it's
think,
like,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, rustic yarns is definitely my go-to these days. And it's funny, like I've been over the summer, I was shifting. Oh, that looks so good. Yeah, like I moved all of my patterns over to my website over the summer. And so going back through my catalog, it was pretty funny and cool just to see how my yarn preferences have shifted over the years. But about 3 years ago, there was like a very specific shift that moved from like highly processed acid dyed yarns over to farm yarns. And there was like not very much in between. I still absolutely value like a really good speckle yarn or I'm really enjoying the mohair silk trend right now. And I like that other dyers who are friends of mine are dyeing it because my own yarn line is Canadian fibers milled at Canadian mills. And we don't have silk growing in Canada on ready supply. So I will never add that yarn myself to any sort of regular lineup. And, I can get mohair here, but I can't get it spun in that way because the machinery is just different. So I like that other people dye yarns that I want to use that I won't dye myself, so I can just pair them with things. But yeah, for the most part, like a minimally processed, either sheep shade or naturally dyed yarn, that's really become my go-to. And what I love with it for lace as well as for cables and texture is that because the yarns have not been so heavily processed that they lose all of their integrity, especially when we're talking about, pardon me, about wool, is that they just show stitches so beautifully. So when you're knitting with a more rustic yarn and you're making a really delicate lace, it still creates such a durable fabric and it blooms really beautifully most of the time. And then when you're doing cables, like they really kind of stick up against the fabric. And yeah, it's just, I love it. And it's a much more tactile experience. And then the other thing I love is that in particular, when I'm doing garments, I don't have any surprises post blocking. Like I remember when I used to knit garments with superwash yarn, and then all of a sudden I had like gorilla arms on the sleeves every single time. I was like, I don't understand. And then I realized, oh, it's because the yarn has no integrity to actually hold itself together. Super convenient when you really want to block a giant shawl like really far out, but not so convenient when you want your sweater to still be the size that you knit it for.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever knit. I don't know. Have I ever knit a garment in superwash yarn? I haven't knit with superwash yarn in a long time. But it was funny. I saw my mom on the weekend, and she actually had a little shawl with her that I gifted her. It was one of the first pieces that I knit. It was beautifully indie dyed yarn, merino, like superwash merino. It held. I have to say, it did hold up super well. She's
good.
Yeah. But it's not something that I would want on my needles anymore right now. There's a place for it. Like I would still knit with superwash yarn. If I'm knitting baby things for friends who I know, I mean, they're little one. like turned a year old is eating like a little monster child. He like, yeah. Let's not get into that. But our like we have, I kid you not, we have, I don't know, 10 loads of laundry every week. This is
Oh,
not exaggerated. So I can understand. There's a place for superwash yarn, you know, if you are a
100%.
busy parent, for example.
Yep.
You know, so
I
not
also
just
like
yeah.
every time I think of like knitting Willow a sweater and all of her fur, that would I'm like,
Yeah.
I would not actually want to knit. I mean, a rustic yarn sweater would look super cute. It would also look disgusting in about 3 seconds. And I don't
Yeah.
want to have to be like brushing her fur
No.
off of like a really sticky wool. Like, yeah, no, there's places for things.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. All right, we got sidetracked a little bit.
We did. This is what
I
happens every time we get on phone calls, though. So I'm not
I
surprised.
know. Me neither. Me neither. But let's backtrack a little bit and let's talk for a few more minutes about Acorn, about the shawl design. Can you share the inspiration behind Acorn and the special details of the shawl?
Yeah, so I really love a good all over body stitch, in particular with lace. So it's the same stitch just growing across the whole
Mm.
body, and then just a really nice simple garter stitch border because I get really bored at the end of my knits and I'm like, get it off my needles. So I like a simple border. And the theme of issue 4 of subverting the norm made a lot of sense for me because I do that all the time as a queer-bodied human. And a number of years ago, I think it was when I was making my second book or shortly after it came out, a friend of the family picked up the book and was looking at the knits, which are all like, when I design knits, I'm like, anybody can wear the thing. I also generally don't put any sort of like waist shaping or anything in. That's a thing I feel like if you want to add it in, easy enough to do it yourself. I generally don't build it into my own patterns. And so he picked up the book and was like, oh, these are really nice, but why don't you design for men? And I was like, well, I design for everybody. But it made me realize that as a femme presenting person, and especially a femme presenting person who passes as a cis woman, if I am the only person modeling my knits, then that can unintentionally put them into a category of being knits for women, even though I don't identify as a woman, and even though that's not the intention behind it. So I started using friends of mine to model things as well. Bryce has just moved to 2 provinces over, which makes me really sad because
No.
people who have followed me for a while will recognize his face in many of my photos. But he was always a really convenient one for my knits for all aesthetic because he was, he's a dude. And he would just wear these lacy shawls so beautifully. And it really removed that idea that lace is only for femme presenting folks. Like, and it's complicated when it comes to gender and gender presentation. Some of us, especially those of us who are cis presenting, have a lot more ability and space to play with that in a way that still maintains our safety. And depending on where you live, then, even down to like specific like neighborhoods, it may be safer for you to play with this more so or not. But I really love and support and try to encourage this idea of if you want to wear the thing, then you can wear the thing. I was going to swear and then I stopped myself.
Oh, you can swear. I'm swearing on here. You know me. You've known me.
I do know you. And I was like, there's gonna be some F-bombs dropped at some point. But so I love the idea of doing lace on any body. But I think that's also why, a thicker lace is also a lot of fun because it already is kind of challenging this idea that lace is only this very thin, delicate thing. And there's absolutely space for this. Like, I love the idea of a little black shawl in the same way that I love the idea of a little black dress in a wardrobe, right? Like I
Yeah.
think that having a really beautiful, delicate, drapey lace shawl is an absolute need, at least in my wardrobe. But I also really love the idea of when it is -40 out and I am covered in wool and fur to keep myself warm, that one of those visible layers is big, chunky lace.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's fun.
I uh I love it so much. And I love Acorn. I love as you said, I love the idea of that body stitch of the lace growing all over the entire body of the shawl. I also love a lot of your other patterns. I especially am thinking about Juniper, a pattern that was your birthday sweater a few years ago.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved. I still have that in my queue. And I actually knit I'm blanking on the pattern name. How's the cardigan version called?
Oh, cedar and wee cedar for the littles.
Exactly. I knit a little wee cedar for my godchild a few months ago, and I so loved it. And I have some yarn in my stash for a version for Oren, so that's gonna happen at some point. So yeah. Just putting that out there.
I can't, like, people like model these really beautiful shots of my patterns and tag me, and I'm like, that looks so good. And then somebody will send, like, they'll take maybe not even the greatest photo, but because it's like on a tiny child and it is a tiny version, I'm like, yes, this automatically wins everything. And if it's a really great photo, then it's like even better, but I don't even care. Like whenever I see a baby or like a toddler toddling around in wee cedar or like a wee spruce hat, I'm like, yes. I don't even have tiny spawn, but I'm just like slowly collecting my samples just in case someday.
Just in case. Someday they might come in handy.
Exactly.
We have a question about Acorn. Could it be bigger?
Absolutely. I can't recall right off the top of my head whether the part where we ended in the charts would very easily shift into the next repeat. But honestly, if it doesn't, you could just build in a little bit of stockinette on those edges. And as soon as you get into your repeats, just keep on going. And then generally when I make a shawl with a chart like that, then the point where I would end it, which in this situation doesn't even matter what the stitch count is because you're just doing a simple garter border, then I would just make sure that the point where I end it is at a natural end of the stitch. So you're not interrupting the stitch kind of mid chart. To make it as big as you want or to deepen that garter stitch border. I know some people love like a really nice thick garter stitch border. This one's on the thinner side. So yeah, you could absolutely just make it bigger.
Yeah. And I'm looking at the chart right now and it would be easy enough to do. Like you can see, I'm not going to show the charts here, but if you look at them, you'll see exactly what the pattern repeat is. And you will know if you've knit, like if you've knit that much of the shawl, exactly.
Yeah. It'll be very easy for you at that point.
Yeah. So the size that we're showing in the sample pictures is that I don't think we actually have one of the pictures, or maybe like somewhere in the magazine somewhere else, but I can't find it quickly. So the size is big enough so that you can wear it wrapped around your shoulders. You can also wear it bandana style. That was the picture that I was looking for. But if you want like a really
like a giant like wrap around
shawl,
you could you can definitely just keep on extending it. Also, if you don't want to do that, then there are a number of makers out there now making really beautiful shawl belts. My friend Crystal with Pearl and Hank makes really good ones, as well as there's the buttons, the non-knitting buttons where it's kind of like a screw that you attach them through. And Yarn on the House carries some, I can't remember who the maker is, but they would work well to kind of attach it as well if you were worried about it slipping off because it might be too small or not wrap around quite in the way that you want it to. One thing that I will say is that because it's a worsted / Aran weight yarn that we're using, if you go the shawl belt route, in my experience, I like thicker ones because they have a better hold once the yarn is that thick, because it would be a fairly large kind of chunk that you're holding together of the fabric at that point.
Yeah. For everyone who doesn't know what a shawl belt is, because I'm not entirely sure how familiar people are with them, can you explain that?
Yeah. So it's literally like a little belt. And I don't have one right on me. But it's, you can actually just like go to a bunch of my patterns that you'll see them, but it's literally like the ones that I use are generally made of leather. And it's essentially a bracelet almost, like you could wear it on your wrist if you had thicker wrists than I do. And it literally looks like a little belt. But what you do is if you've got like your triangular shawl kind of wrapped around and you've got the one end kind of flipped over the way that you would, then you just take the shawl belt and you wrap it around and you just, you would fasten it. So depending on the style, some have buckles, some have snaps, some are just a wraparound with a long tail that you would just kind of like twist in. And so they literally just kind of hold the pieces of fabric together so that then your ends of your shawl can't slip as easily off. So yeah, and they work quite well, especially if you're not a fan of knotting your shawls, or if the ends are kind of too chunky to make a nice knot. I generally, with my thicker shawls, I often don't like knotting them just because it kind of stretches the fabric in a way that I don't love. So yeah, shawl belts work really well for that.
I don't remember how long ago that was, but ever since I've seen, I think it was your pattern photos, the first time that I actually saw a shawl belt anywhere, I was like, I need to get one of those because I have a few shawls where I always wear them bandana style like this, and then I just knot the ends, but I have a few where that just doesn't look as nice, or I don't like the way that it looks because they are on the thicker side, and then we'll just bunch everything up here, and it's like also not very comfy. So hey, need to get one.
Yeah, I think usually the one that people end up referring back to is my Scorpio shawl that I did when I did the unfolding collection last year, 2 years ago. I don't remember anymore. 2 years ago, maybe.
2 years ago, I think. Oh my God.
That I have no time is a non-thing. But yeah, there was a photo that Jameson's of Shetland shared around, and so that was also sort of around the time that Crystal was really getting Pearl and Hank established, and so the photo had it the tiny shawl belt, which works really well for fingering weight shawls. If you were to use it for Acorn, I would say the in-betweener is a better one just because it's basically the same thing. It's literally like, it looks like a little mini belt with a buckle. And the difference is just in the size. So the in-betweener is just a bit thicker and a bit longer. And so it works better for those bigger shawls.
Lovely. I think I'm just looking at my question list. We kind of covered my question on lace for all aesthetic already. So unless you're very opposed to it, let's skip that one and start talking about your beautiful essay that you wrote for issue 4. It's called On Being Queer Enough. And when I looked at your
author's note is like as long as the article.
But I think the thing is, like Claire and I think we were talking about this in our YouTube video on the articles, on the essays, that we think the author's note is so good, and I think so educational for people, and so well written. It doesn't feel, often like an author's note is a tiny little thing, almost like an afterthought. I feel it's a proper part of the essay. In order to understand the essay, you have to read it.
Well,
Um,
and I feel like especially like the article talks about my lived experience as a
mm,
queer femme, which is also colored by the fact that I am white and I live in Canada, and I'm, university educated. And so also the jargon of gender
yeah,
theory and gender identity and identity politics is something that often is extremely academic and extremely white and extremely classist and all the rest of those things. And so it's a world that I am very familiar with and comfortable in terms of the language that is used. But it is also something that when we're talking about identity politics, it's not something that is static. It's not something that is one size fits all.
yeah,
And I think it's really important. And also it's very location specific. And even the language that we use is very location specific across the board with all identity politics. So I think it's important to kind of remind people of that, and
mm,
so that folks who are not in the community don't take my experience as the only experience
mm,
that then informs their understanding of the whole community, and also so that folks who live in the community know that, if their experience is different, that doesn't make it any less valid, and also that if my experience doesn't reflect theirs, that's also extremely normal. Like we all have different lenses that we are coming through. So, and especially I think with being non-binary, it's something that is still very unfamiliar in a lot of circles. It's something that a lot of folks really don't understand, but also it's like, for my experience as a white non-binary femme, it's very different than for someone who, their ancestral lineage
mm,
has a lot more gender identities. Like the gender binary is
mm,
very much tied into colonialism, and a lot of the gender identities that are not within the traditional Western binary of woman versus man, they were destroyed or attempted to be destroyed via
yeah,
colonialism. And so my experience as a non-binary femme is different because it's like doesn't have that extra level of trauma attached to it. My experience
mm,
is often more so one of erasure because I don't I don't always look queer, including in queer
mm,
circles, which is kind of what we get at in the article. So my experience is one of erasure, which also has its privileges, and so um, there's privileges within being able to kind of hide in situations, which I don't like to, but if I need to for safety's sake, then I can.
yeah,
And then there can be a loneliness attached to that experience. But that's my own shit to deal with. It's not, compounded by, it is compounded by systemic things, but not in the same way that other femmes experience.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm sorry. I got slightly distracted. If you can hear baby crying, it's because my family just came home.
Hello.
Yeah. We were talking about Willow making an appearance, huh? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right now she is. Oh, her eyes just opened. I can't always tell when her eyes open whether she's still sleeping or not, but they're not moving, so I think she's not asleep.
Yeah.
Sometimes she'll have her eyes open and be dreaming, and her pupils start like moving all over the place, and it's mildly terrifying. She looks possessed.
It's like, ooh. Yeah. Let's not let. I want to get back to the author's note. I'm gonna get super sidetracked otherwise.
Yes.
You already basically summarized a lot of what the author's note said. One of the things that I thought about when you were sharing this just now was that I wanted to share a little story. that a friend of mine shared with me, and she gave the magazine to her grandma, and she read your article. And part of why I love this author's note so much is also because it is, or in that situation, it was a conversation starter, because that particular grandma, she started reading it. And I'm just going to read like the first sentence, basically, or part of the first sentence that you wrote. You wrote, this article is written from the lived experiences and viewpoints of a white Canadian non-binary queer femme who passes as a cis woman and can pass as being part of a hetero cis relationship. And that first sentence sparked a conversation between my friend and her grandma, who asked, what is non-binary? What is queer? What is femme? What is cis, right? And I think often these conversations don't happen because we don't have any conversation starters, you know? Like, either you're kind of sort of maybe a little bit familiar with, you know, that maybe men and women, male and female, are not the only gender, you know, you kind of like getting either your feet wet, you've heard those terms before, or you're like not familiar with this at all and you don't have any touch points. And so this is why I love also that author's note that you included in the article, because I think also in the knitting community, there might be a lot of people who don't have any touch points with this at all, you know, and you might be reading the first sentence and they'd be like, I'm going to Google this, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's brilliant. You know, I always like sharing things with people where they learn something and maybe expand their worldview a little bit.
Yep, definitely. And it's a funny one because like I said, I can pass as being straight, which is funny, and also as passing as cis, which is also funny. But, you know, I can walk into most yarn stores and not be questioned. Like, you know, my piercings and my tattoos are the things that make me stand out. The rest of me doesn't. Like, if I didn't have my septum piercing and I was wearing a sweater, then I would look like any kind of like, you know, millennial white woman walking into a yarn store, because it's become trendy. And it's like, there are so many things incorrect about that statement. But as a result of it, honestly, I have found that the knitting community has a harder time with my pronouns and with my gender identity, not in a way where people are challenging me about it necessarily, but just where it's not even thought that maybe there is something else that I might identify as. Whereas in the natural dyeing community, that's not been a thing that has been as much of a shock, which is really interesting. And I don't even think, like, it's not specifically generational. I have a number of customers and friends from the knitting community who are, you know, my parents' age and older, who have never had a problem with my pronouns and have very much right from the get-go. Like, as soon as they figure, you know, they learn what they are, then that is what they use when they're discussing me with other people and all of that. And I've had folks who are younger than me, you know, call me she. And at this point, it's interesting because I remember you saying, like, has anything shifted for you since writing that, when I was kind of reviewing what the questions were. And a bit of it has shifted for me in the past year, in that I care less about being called her, specifically by people who are close to me in my life. And I think a big part of that is because for a really long time, my issue with the pronoun she is the baggage that is attached to it. And so it was, when people called me she, then it was that they were not acknowledging my queerness within that. Whereas now, that has shifted for me, where the people who are close to me in my life, at least, whether they call me she or they call me they, I know that they understand and value my non-binary-ness and my queerness. That being said, when it comes to my professional life, that I'm like, no, if you don't know who I am, or if I am being presented in a professional way, I do need you to use my proper pronouns, because I'm being, shown off in a weird way to a bunch of people who are strangers, who don't know me, who don't know my inherent queerness. And so because of that whole experience of passing when I don't want to pass, then I do need it acknowledged with it by using the language that we have. And I was thinking about it recently too, just in terms of like I said, I don't have spawn other than Willow. But if I was a parent, I would not want to be called mom for the same reason as she has problems for me. Not in that my kids themselves would not know, like, this is mom, and also mom is non-binary. Like, my kids would very much be growing up with an understanding of queerness and be in a queer household. But in that, people around like, motherhood is so heavily gendered, and parenthood is so heavily gendered in our society, that I would be worried about, or I would have issues with what other people would assume if they heard my kid call me mom. And it's like, it has nothing to do with my relationship with the person directly, and is also not something that's particularly tangible, right? Like, there's lots of cis folks who very much subvert the traditional idea of what their cis identity is. But for me, I am not cis. I don't identify as cis. And so regardless of whether somebody is like, well, you are sometimes a tomboy or sometimes not. I'm very rarely a tomboy. But like, their language is so limiting and also so important. And so I think that's where it gets kind of tricky. And also lately I've been doing a lot more work bilingually with English and French. And my French is still very rusty. And I understand, like, I can be in French conversations and I will just be responding in English because my own vocabulary is quite limited still. Or I feel like it's limited, and that stops me from using it. But it was interesting because I recently had a French colleague in the industry use she as well as elle for me. And I was like, I need you to fix the she, but with elle, because it's a gendered language, at this point, I have not spent enough time with French and gender theory for me to figure out what feels best in French, because it's not only your pronoun that you're dealing with there. It's also, what's the end of the word going to be? And I don't believe that the automatic shift to a masculine as neutral suits me either, because as a femme, that's not my experience. And I have a lot of issues with the fact that neutral is just slightly less specific masculine. And like, androgynous is very rarely with feminine markers. It just means that they've removed some of the masculine markers. So I haven't figured out within gendered languages, like I'm also learning Polish right now, which is also a gendered language. And so, within those, I don't really know where my comfort level is yet. And so my default is, okay, we'll stick with the feminine options for now while I figure out what is the thing that feels best for me. But and that's also where it gets really interesting when you speak to people who, speak English as one of many other languages that they speak, because that's where, we can get kind of stuck on things. Like, I identify as a queer femme, but to a French speaker, femme is women. So it's, it gets interesting and complicated. And I don't think that there's a perfect answer anywhere. So
No, and I don't think just, well, living in a country where German is a gendered language, right? It's the same as French. And we're, as far as gender language goes, we're stuck at the point where we're seriously still discussing whether there are a few different ways that you can incorporate at least two genders in a German noun. One of them is with a little asterisk, which is there to indicate that there are more than two genders, right?
Right.
So this is the preferred option of, well, a lot of people that I interact with, a lot of the people, you know, of our generation that are present in that discussion. But we're seriously still stuck at the level of, is that actually a good idea, or should we use like a minus or something, right?
My God.
Let alone a discussion about the fact that we do not have a pronoun like they or them, right? Like we don't.
Which is bizarre. But how do you guys have? So, but then what do you do with like this is the bit that I always find really funny with English speakers is when they're like, well, they can't be a singular pronoun, which is like, okay, you're ignoring the history of the English language because it was for a very long time. But also even ignoring that in modern usage, if you're talking about somebody general who you don't know, then you say, well, they're going to go do that thing. And then I'm going to go over here. But that person over there, I don't know what they're doing. Like they use it all the time in singular usage. But then when it comes to somebody saying, well, my pronoun is they, they're like, I just can't wrap my brain around that. You're like, what? What do you mean you can't? You literally just used it 2 sentences ago.
No. Oh, yeah. No, I wish we could just borrow the they. There's no, well, there are some.
Yes. But then you still run into the issue in gendered languages where like in French, I could use en, but it then doesn't deal with the fact that because it is a gendered language, using en usually means that the rest of the things, whether it's the adjectives or the whatever, or the verb, like everything still automatically defaults to the masculine.
Yeah.
Like en is neutral, but then because it is neutral, you shift everything to masculine, which maintains it as neutral. But if you were to shift it to the feminine options instead, then people will suddenly shift from en to elle. And it's like, this really should not be this difficult. It also should not be your business to be challenging me on my gender identity. I always find that really interesting when people kind of want to question you on it. And it's like, well, because this is how I feel, this is how I exist in the world. And a lot of it is intangible. And in my own experience, again, as a queer passing, or like as a queer femme who passes as a cis woman, it's much more in the microaggressions that I experience the bullshit. Whereas for femmes who do not pass as cis women and are at the highest levels of violence, it's the microaggressions, but also a lot of the macroaggressions. Like it's just straight up aggression that they experience a lot of the time. So yeah, but it's very strange to me that, and I say very strange, I understand it, systemic, blah, 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 blah. But it's strange to me that we feel like we should be challenging somebody's identity of, somebody's like self-identity of gender, particularly when, I don't know. It's just all of it to me is like, why is it your business? It's not.
No, it's not. And it's like, why, like, I don't know. I have a hard time wrapping my head around this. It's not, do you think it's because people feel challenged or threatened or like in 100%. Their own, like, what
no, is the 100%, like, there's so much, just fear that is attached to it because it's destabilizing, right? Like to queer, at the like in your like academic sense of it is to destabilize the status quo, which what is for me why queer is both my identity and also my active politics. So I'm constantly queering things in terms of challenging and destabilizing the status quo. But it's funny because often when you challenge those things, the folks that get the most upset are the folks that have the most tenuous grasp on their own identity of gender, right? Like we look at toxic masculinity, and that is like the most fragile thing out there. And it is because like they're so scared that any like step outside of that toxic masculinity will lose them their identity of and their self identity as a man or as a woman or whatever, that they then feel the need to violently repress somebody who is challenging that idea, either through clothing choice or by fucking with gender roles or by just like men showing emotion, like cis men showing emotion is something that is still like very very challenged in our society. And it's so stupid because like I love reality TV. Little fun fact about me, I like letting my brain melt. And the number of times that I am watching shows and I just see these straight people straight cis folks who are having the hardest time in their marriages because they don't communicate well. And often it is because the men don't want to talk about the thing. And then the women are talking about it in this very heightened way. And the two are just clashing. And I'm like, this is actually like a really simple conversation. Like, just express your feelings, state the thing that you need, acknowledge whether or not that is a thing that you as the other person can support or not. And like, or, if you can't give them that thing, then like, what is the thing that you can give them instead that is going to feel good for both of you? Like, it's just the number of issues that come down to people not expressing themselves clearly and there's a vulnerability in that, and that's scary. But I think softness should be much more celebrated. I think vulnerability should be much more celebrated. There's a strength that is inherent in both of those things. I think we should be hunting for joy at like a much deeper level than this constant like race to the bottom and like the shit Olympics where we are trying to prove that we have it worse than somebody else. Like what is that doing for us? How is that helping any of us? And being like, well, I have it worse than you, or like it's not helpful because the people at the top don't give a shit about any of us anyway. And so by finding joy and by celebrating joy and support and community care and having more capacity to spread that out amongst all of us, that's what's going to really fuck with the system. Because us being happy is the thing that is, I think, the most radical. And I feel like COVID has really made that very clear for me this year. The Sagittarius in me is just like, I'm going to thrive just to spite everything else.
I think that last point that you just shared, that reminds me of a conversation that I had this morning with my best friend, who told me that a lot of her friends had been contemplating changing jobs, leaving unhappy relationships. And we kind of got talking about why that is. And I think it's because COVID for a lot of us has meant such a deep shift and such a moment, like it's allowed us reflection at a level that most of us would have never otherwise had ever in their life. Like I was lucky enough that I had like or that I had some time that allowed me that reflection about my work and what I wanted from life a few years ago when I left my last employed job. But most of us were not that lucky. And I think that's it's going to be a shift that hopefully ripples through a lot of our lives for the next decades, right? People actually understanding that you can allow yourself to be happy and you can start questioning the status quo and you can start thinking about what a happy life would look like for you. And then take the next steps.
Yeah, I was talking with a friend the other day and we were both just like, she was like, you know, I'm finding that the existential angst is just boring. And I was like, yeah, there's something incredibly tedious about holding on to this unhappiness. Like, it doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't solve anything. It doesn't fix anything. I think this is also where like the Aries in me is very stubborn and bullheaded, but then the Sagittarius in me, I'm finding that the sun is just arriving at the right spot. The Sagittarius in me is like if you're going to complain about a thing, complain and also give a solution, or acknowledge if you don't know what the solution is, but like don't just be like poo-pooing on things and then ending it at that. Like that's not helpful. Like, yes, this is shitty. Now what do we do? Like that's kind of always the way that I've approached things. I'm also like hardcore mama bear nurse, fixer in ways that are not always necessarily the most helpful. Like my friends just kind of put up with it. And like, it's sort of known that like, if you come to me with a problem, then probably I'm going to give you my opinion about how to at least attempt to start fixing it. And sometimes I rein myself in and I'm like, I'll remember to ask like, do you want to just vent to me? Do you want a solution right now? Do you want to, you know, come back, like have some feelings and then come back later and fix it? And that kind of helps to drive the situation. But I'm also like, I'm too emotional of a creature. My Venus is in Pisces to be yelled at about something that then I'm just supposed to like sit with. Like you can't yell at me, even if it's like you're just yelling at me, not about me for a thing that I have done. Like I can't handle that. So if you're going to come and complain to me, I'm going to try and help you fix the thing.
I can very much relate to that. I'm a little bit mindful of our time. We've talked for almost an hour and inevitably we got sidetracked again, but into a very lovely direction.
I think so.
I think so too. Let's backtrack a little bit and let me ask you one more question about your essay. Anyone who has not seen it yet in the magazine, who has a copy, you need to go read it. You need to go share it with your friends. You need to buy 10 copies and share them with your friends just because of that essay. Just kidding. But if you want to, I'm not going to stop you. I really do think it's that fantastic. What I wanted to ask about this is you're in the essay portion of this, also in the author's note, but also in the essay. You're sharing a very personal journey, which I hope can be inspiring to folks who are questioning their own identity or feel like they are kept outside the gaze in whichever community they identify with or communities. As you think about those folks, what are the things that you would tell them right now based on your own lived experience?
I would say don't expect to ever find a perfect answer, unfortunately. I still I have been queer for more of my life. Like I openly identified and recognized myself as being queer to myself and others for more of my life than I have not. And that doesn't count, the years that now I look back on and I'm like, oh yeah, I had a crush on that person, or like that situation was, that was me just being a little baby queer and not realizing it. But Yeah, I mean, I still like, I would say probably every 6 months or so, which is also sort of seasonal with my wardrobe. My clothing choices are inherently tied to what my gender identity is feeling. Uh,
Mm.
so one thing that I would say is fuck minimalism. A, it's classist. But B, as a queer person who has, gender identities that like to shift depending on a whole bunch of
Mm.
things. Having a minimalist wardrobe is actually probably one of the worst things that I could do to myself. And
Hmm.
that is because there are some days where I want to wear a dress and really cute tights and my stomping boots or stilettos. And then there are other days where I want pants and a plaid shirt. And I
Mm.
need, and generally I find that if my gender identity is kind of like staying semi-stable, I need at least a week's worth of clothes to kind of like get me through that particular shift. And then I might shift back. So fuck minimalism, have all the things.
Love that advice.
And then find people around you who are going to support you and value you and reaffirm your identity.
Mm.
There are going to be situations where you cannot do that. Like part of why I even got used to hearing she as my pronoun again after a couple of years of being very vehemently like making sure that people called me they was I ended up working in a workplace that was so gendered and there was no way that they were going to be able to figure it out. And so for me, the emotional labor of, sorry, a fly just went past, the emotional labor of correcting people with my pronouns
Mm.
was worse than me just getting used to hearing she again.
Yeah.
And so it became a lot more valuable when people at my workplace would try and remember my pronouns. I appreciated it much more in that situation. But your mental health is ultimately more important than what other people think you should be doing as a queer.
Mm.
Also, queers are the fucking worst when it comes to gatekeeping our own community. So if one queer tells you that you're doing queer wrong, who cares? That screw that. Also, queers are really good at being really hypocritical. So the number, like part of this article was me reflecting on the number of times that I, as a queer femme who uses they as a pronoun, would go
Mm.
into queer events. And I have a lot of space and capacity for cis folks who are not queer, who don't, live in queer community misgendering me because that is not part of their everyday world. I have significantly less space for fellow queers who come into a space, bitch about the random cis folks in their life who have misgendered them, the random stranger in the street or the cashier who doesn't know
Mm.
them, and then turn around to the femmes in their space and use she without asking their pronouns. Like I have way less capacity for being kind to those people. Because at that point it's like, no, you're in our community. Like you should,
Yeah.
if this is a thing that bothers you, then you should be extending that consideration to the other folks. And then part of that is also recognizing that we all screw up all the time. The number of queers in my life where as we shift our names, as we shift our pronouns, and then as you get older, you spend time apart from people, you see them, 5 years later, and you use a name that they don't use anymore, or you use a pronoun that has shifted for them. Like there just needs to be more space for us to make mistakes. But then when you make a mistake and you get corrected, then just acknowledge it and move on. Like, don't
Mm.
make a big thing of it. Don't turn it into you feel so bad because you did that. Like, nobody gives a shit. Stop
Yeah.
making it about you. You're making the other like, this is part of why, for me, I often don't correct people. I do correct people when it's a work related thing, but otherwise, I
Hmm.
generally don't correct people in my life. And honestly, it's because I am not interested in doing the emotional labor for the people
Mm.
who have just made the mistake and now want to make it about them because they feel bad for making the mistake. Like, I don't care you misgendered me. I'm
Yeah.
not going to bother correcting you in this particular situation because I don't have the energy to deal with your feelings about misgendering me. Like, it's not about you, and I'm not interested in making it about you. But the folks that have, like, you learn to just say, oh, sorry, and then you use the correct term, and then you move on with your conversation. Like, that is the way to do it. You're allowed to make mistakes. Just make a quick correction and move on. And then also, like, when you've made the mistake and you've been corrected, keep that in your brain. Like, I have capacity for folks who, it's not part of their everyday life. But then once you've been corrected, I expect you to be putting the effort in. Like, I find it always really interesting when cis folks will correctly use the nickname of their cis friend, but then when a trans person or a non-binary person or a queer person says, well, this is my pronoun and this is my name, then they almost, like, with some folks, it's almost like a challenge to not use it, which I find very interesting. And kind of says, I know, it says a lot about that person, not in any good ways.
No.
But yeah, like, if you can call your friend who was born Robert by his name Bob, because Bob is what he likes, then you can call your friend who maybe you went to school with, and at that point their name was Chelsea, and now their name is Rowan. Like, if you can do it for one person, you can do it for other people. And yes, we have space for you to make mistakes and to fix it, but don't make it about yourself, and make it a quick fix. And try. Like, honestly, it's the trying that I appreciate the most. Like, I have my closest friends regularly kind of bounce back and forth between using they and she for me. And I don't mind, because I know that they put the effort in and that they care and that they know who I am and that they value my identity, regardless of what pronoun they use. So yeah. And wear whatever lipstick you want to wear.
Yes, you don't have to wear the blue. You're going to get
although
that.
If you like wearing blue, feel free.
Yeah, totally. Blue looks awesome.
Yep. I can't pull it off, but other people can.
Have I ever tried? No, lots of blue eyeshadow when I was in my teens.
Oh yes,
that was an interesting look. Good thing digital cameras didn't exist back then, I think.
Oh my god.
Or maybe that's so good. I'm not sure. Maybe, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we'll look back in 10 years at whatever we're wearing right now and be like, that was an interesting choice.
That was interesting. Yeah. 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 Very true. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing so much with us.
Yeah.
Like,
thanks for having
me. We're gonna get to your whips. If you have 5 more minutes, because I want to see what's in your needles or what you're recently finished, because it's all awesome. It's just that I think just listening to you, I can't help but think how much I learned from you just personally, over the last few years. And it's been such a privilege, I'm very thankful for that. Yeah.
Thanks, love.
Alrighty, let's move on to what you have on the needles. You have a couple of things to show, don't you?
I do. So I am not a monogamous knitter. Every once in a while, I'll have a little point of being monogamous, and it's usually that I'm trying to push through a bunch of deadlines. Yeah. So I have a few things on my needles. And the one thing that I'm doing not so great right now is that usually I try to have something that is relatively easy social knitting on my needles, and then something that is more complicated, because I do really love my complicated cables and lace charts. And right now, all I have on my needles is cables and lace charts. So, we're doing the opposite of what I should be doing during COVID, really, but whatever. So one of the things that I have on my needles is a very slowly growing Daydreamer by Andrea Mowry. And one thing that I am loving, so I mentioned that I've moved my patterns to my website. And I've stopped selling on Ravelry, and that decision was made over several months this year, and just enough tomfoolery happened that I was like, I'm over this shit. And since I removed myself, the pressure that I have felt to be regularly releasing patterns, which I've been doing for the past 6+ years, magically disappeared, because suddenly I didn't need to stand out in all the noise there anymore. And so that was really beautiful. And I was like, oh wait, now I can just knit the things that I want to knit using my yarns, because I want to do that too. And I've been wanting to do more sweater construction, because I really value, as a designer, knitting other designers' work when I'm able to, because it gives me a nice refresher. It gives me a chance to kind of see, like, how are other people doing construction methods. When it comes to sweaters, it just makes me feel better, because ultimately there is no perfectly easy way of laying out a sweater pattern once you grade it across enough sizes, because it's just never going to magically fit, the exact same math across 10 sizes to get the same lovely silhouette. So it's just always going to be a slightly messy looking pattern, and that is okay. So it's nice to see that that is everybody's lived experience as a designer. So for Daydreamer, I am using a strand of my Roots fingering yarn dyed with logwood and black walnuts, which gives me this like really stunning, the lighting is not so grand here, but it's this like really stunning mauve, like gray mauve, that I am completely in love with. And I paired it with a strand of Ocean's Halo yarn, which is a silk mohair blend. Ocean is the sweetest friend. And so this is just like a really lovely, magical sweater. And it's like full of really delicious cables. It's been very fun, albeit slow to knit. And it's going to be a super fancy date night layer that I am very excited about.
This is looking awesome.
It's going to be so nice. I'm really excited. I also am loving the high-waisted trend, because as a very much a pear shape, the whole cropped tops and high-waisted bottoms is a good look for me. So this is fun. And then other things that I have on my needles. So COVID derailed my plans for having my third book published by now. And I had to really just kind of shift all of my timelines. And so I am now getting ready to shift back into the final prep mode for that book. And Samson and I have discussed what our options are. He lives 5,000 miles away from me. So we shot the first half of the book 11 months ago. 10 months ago. And so I'm going to be shooting the last half of the book by myself, without him, which makes me sad. But it's going to be a book of shawls and other lovely things. And I'm using Harrisville nightshades for it, for all of them. And it's that, like, this book at this point is about 3 years in the making. I think it'll be 4 years by the time it comes out. But it's been just like the witchy book of my dreams through its creation. So I'm working on that. And then I have my mini skeins ready to go for swatching the Tarot's next batches of swatches. And that for folks who don't follow me on Instagram, has become my new weekly IGTV series, where I knit a swatch using my Roots yarn that I have dyed with local dye plants. So it's like a natural dye study. We talk about the plant that is used, and I talk a little bit about the swatch, the stitches that are chosen, and then it's tied into a tarot card from the major arcana. So I kind of pull all of my witchy stuff together into a weekly IGTV series, which is a lot of fun, and came as a result of the first round of my Creative Coven Challenge, which is coming back in a few weeks. So as of Thursday, y'all are hearing this, I think, first. As of Thursday, people will be able to sign up. It's a free challenge, and there's a fresh set of prompts this time. So if you took part last round, there will be new prompts for you this round. And so over 5 days, so from October 12th to 16th, you will get homework via an email in your inbox. And we go from having no ideas to, or maybe you have oodles of ideas and you just need to pare shit down, to having a swatch by the end of the week. So that's going to be fun. And yeah, as a result of last round, because I participate with people each time, last round I ended up coming up with this Watching the Tarot series. So we will see what I come up with as a result of this round. Hopefully not something that is quite as ambitious as this particular project. This is going to be like, it's a long one. I'm working on the major arcana. I don't know if we're going to move on to the rest of the deck or not. Yeah, so those are the things that are currently on my needles. And I think I have a pair of socks somewhere. I always have a pair of socks on the needles.
Oh, that's always a good idea. Yeah. I love this. Thank you for sharing. Where can people sign up for the Creative Coven Challenge?
So as of Thursday, if they go to ashalberg.com, the pop-ups and the banners will be updated. Also, if you follow me on Sunflower Knit on Instagram at Sunflower Knit, I'll be updating the link in my bio also on Thursday to take people directly there. And so, yeah, it's just you put in your name and your email address. And we're also we'll also be doing things on Instagram with it. But if you don't use Instagram, you really just need access to your inbox over those 5 days. But if you do take part on Instagram, feel free to join in our Creative Coven Pups hashtag, because everybody loves the doggos, and that came as a result. We lost Hannah Lisa. Willow leads us through the challenge. She is the team mascot that leads us through the whole week. And then last round, participants created the Creative Coven Pups so that everybody's fur babies could get involved. I think one of our Creative Coven Pups was actually a cat last round. So feel free to showcase your dogs and your cats and your rabbits and your reptiles. Please don't put in any spiders. I don't like spiders. But the Creative Coven Pups hashtag is also what you can follow along if you are joining us on Instagram for that. Annalisa needs to find some headphones to rejoin us. But yeah, so it's a free challenge. It's fun. It's very low key in terms of your homework and your expectations. And if you fall behind, it's no big deal. You can just play catch up whenever you want. And again, that will be starting October 12th, and it'll go October 12th through the 16th. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I don't know whether I'm going to allow myself to get as creative as I did last time, because I don't think that I can afford to have another tarot deck sized inspiration hit right now. I've got other things I need to finish off.
I'm back. I'm probably echoing like nobody's business because my headphones completely died on me. I'm so sorry. Apparently that then kicked me out of the YouTube live. Thank you so much for covering. we should do this more often. Let's not do it. All right. I have a new set of headphones with a plug that does not fit my computer. Okay, this is wonderful. All right, I think this is a sign for us to wrap up.
Yeah.
Great. All right.
Were there any questions we had to do?
No, I think the one question about Acorn we already answered. People, if you have any other questions, now would be a good time to ask them. Otherwise, I'll include links to Ash's website down below, which is where you can find their patterns. Not on Ravelry anymore. I mean, you can still, I check Ravelry, you can still see at least the old patterns on there.
Yeah.
So
and then there's third part. This is really major echo. Yeah, you can see third-party patterns on there still, and purchase them from the third-party partners. But yeah, my own patterns, all future and current purchases happen on my website.
Okay, wonderful. I'll also have links. I muted you there for a second so that we could kind of not have the massive echo there. I'll also include links to your Instagram, which people should absolutely check out because you take the most beautiful photos. There is willow, a lot of willow. You know, you lovely audience didn't get to see this time. Maybe we'll have.
Can you see her? Oh, yeah, there she is. Curled up.
So cozy. Lovely.
She's giving me the biggest side eye.
What are you doing? Yes. Lovely. Thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing everything about Acorn that you shared, for sharing about your personal story, the advice that you shared, the insights into gender identity, gender politics. I think I might need to have you back here if you're up for it at some point.
Up for it.
I hear there's no more questions, just people saying that it's a great interview, which I can only second. It was wonderful. We need to have you back. So we're going to do that at some point. And until then, I will let you go and get back to your work day. I'll be finishing up mine in a little while. And lovelies, don't forget, so Thursday, Creative Coven Challenge opens up for registration. Yeah, go to ashalberg.com to register then. And I'll be back here next week, probably with lovely Claire, because we haven't really had a catch-up kind of chat, making stories, what's happening in our world for the longest time. So we're going to do that. And we have a few exciting things planned for the next few months. So, hope you're going to join us for that. Thank you so much, Ash. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, you too.
Bye-bye.